Momoko, this is supposed to be a review of your show and not The Acolyte.
The power of many.
Cold opener for this one featured... Okay, bye. I'm not dealing with this shit. Bye. Yes, this one was going to feature the Stooges, though notably, this one was going to be more just about one of them, Sugiyama, who is now the odd man out due to the class reassignments. So, I guess it could lead to an interesting little tale and not annoy the crap out of me? Well, unfortunately, things didn't get off to a good start, with Doremi already making some bad puns. Personally, I'm still waiting on Tai to get his really awesome upgrade. And as for our wayward spotlight character of this episode... Though notably, one kid got a laugh out of him, and it wasn't Hazuki, as she was in a different class. Not that it registered with Sugiyama, leaving him in the dumps. This did lead to a nice bit where Momoko managed to empathize with him as a kid who couldn't see their friends as much as they used to. Though in her case, her friends were separated by the international date line. Meanwhile, Sugiyama couldn't see his old friends during recess. The only thing was that they had moved on without him and replaced him with a kid named Sato, and oh hey, that's Ryota's voice actor. So, are we dealing with his cute Wormmon voice, or the kid who's constantly going through puberty and... Puberty it is, great. But okay, with all my complaints with this episode so far, I did start to like it from here, as if anything, it did really help to contextualize why I really hated the SOS trio from the very start. I mean, it's one thing if they constantly tell bad puns, as to be fair, that is a very subjective matter of comedy, as even Hazuki proves somebody might find it funnier than others. No, my real issue with them is what they did when their puns didn't get over, which was almost always, and instead relied on some mean-spirited jokes. Being it body-shaming their classmates or making fun of someone's difficult situation, like, you know, if they had all been in Momoko's class, they would have made her cry a lot more than Reika could have ever. It's just outright toxic behavior, as their whole act eventually just evolves into general trolling and annoying antics, because deep down, I think they all realize that they're not that funny, but they still want the attention. And yes, comedians should be free to tell whatever jokes they want, and maybe be as offensive as they deem it necessary, but again, as necessary, and to the point that they can at least make people outside of their initial group laugh more. In short, you shouldn't pull a SpongeBob and just keep making squirrel jokes all the time. Now granted, all of this is my dollar store psychological evaluation, but when looking at the episode that way, it does make it a whole lot better. As after Sugiyama was dumped by his toxic friends, who of course would replace him the first chance they got, he tried to find a new comedic partner, and what did he say to the first kid he tried to recruit? This is just what happens when you're programmed into believing that any sort of toxic behavior is acceptable when you're backed up by your friends. It's good karma, as it's also meant to be a wake-up call for Sugiyama to realize that he needs to change up his routine. And fortunately for him, he did eventually find a seemingly unlikely partner in the resident pretty boy of their class, Ogura. Yep, he actually liked Sugiyama's jokes, and even seemed like he really wanted to be his friend.
Easy, social distancing, buddy. Social distancing.
No, and to further hammer home my toxic friends theory, just as soon as they somehow learned about Sugiyama's new partner, the new SOS trio immediately challenged them to a goof-off, even though they hadn't practiced their first routine yet. Yeah, you try and tell me that's not the look of a toxic friend, and I have about a dozen bridges to sell ya. Fortunately, the Ojamajo were willing to help them refine their routine at the Mahodo. With that, they settled on naming themselves the Toyo Ken Duel, and practiced with Hazuki and Aiko as their coaches. Meanwhile, Momoko further reflected on her own experiences with having to say goodbye to her old friends.
仲良かった友達と別れて寂しい気持ち。
Yeah, the only difference is that I'm pretty sure most of your friends weren't total putzes. In fact, one of them even became better over time. Eventually though, and after Aiko slapped them around a little bit, she helped them realize what their real routine should be, which of course was slapstick. Which, yeah, it makes sense as it is one of the most universal forms of comedy, especially when you have the spirit and timing down pat. Granted, as Aiko pointed out, they did need a little more of the former. Regardless of their act still needing some work, the episode itself kept cooking as the friendship between these two was quite nice. Hell, they even had just enough time for a breakup arc that didn't feel too rushed. I mean, it was justified in that we had already seen Ogura's popularity with the other kids and Sugiyama's underlying contempt for him. So it made sense that he'd end up breaking up with him once their act went nowhere, and yet one of them still remained way more popular than the other. Again, I really like watching this episode from the perspective of a kid who needs to unlearn some really bad habits that he got from some toxic friends. Sugiyama was just too used to sharing a hive mind with his former cohorts, and therefore couldn't really grasp the idea that one of them might stand out more than the other, and how they could be respected rather than envied. Really good stuff, and oh yeah, this was supposed to be a magical girl show too, wasn't it? Yeah, the only real bit of magic in this whole episode was just the Ojamajo using their brooms to catch up with a runaway Sugiyama. No big deal really, and Momoko encouraging him with her broken Japanese was quite endearing, as it was showing that she was at least putting in the effort. Anyway, they managed to reunite the two after Sugiyama found Ogura literally bleeding for their craft. And with that, they also nicely called back to the previous episode, where they actually did reuse the failed cookies to make little cakes, which is literally what they translate out to, based on their Dutch origins, so really clever stuff there on literal multiple layers. But yeah, they gave them to the two to celebrate their reunion, and the episode ended with them making good with the new SOS trio. Didn't say it was a perfect episode. Regardless though, I still did really like this episode, in spite of a bit of a rocky first act. Yeah, of course, the SOS trio in general still annoy me, but as a character analysis for one of their former members, this was actually quite effective. Hell, you could even argue that some of the more negative aspects of the original group really helped to accentuate this story. Again, while a lot of what I said was likely just my own interpretations, and probably not even all that intentional, it did help to really improve my enjoyment of this episode, even though it was still pretty good on its own. I mean, yeah, Sugiyama was probably my very last choice for a spotlight character in the show, but to their credit, they did make him a lot more relatable and sympathetic. After all, it is often the case that even if separated by a classroom or two, friends can drift apart as time goes by. More so when said friends were never really good ones to begin with. Thus, seeing Sugiyama realize and adjust to this was quite endearing, as he had become a little too attached to their original trio and needed to start branching out. For his part, and while not fleshed out all that much, Ogura was a likable enough character who did have some depth to him, being more than just a pretty boy. Their conflict of trying to forge both a comedy routine and lasting friendship was actually quite good, and for the most part made up for the bad jokes in this episode. I mean, yeah, they were still there and quite eye-rolling, but seeing these two try to figure out the basics of comedy was interesting. Another notable aspect about this episode was the fact that the Ojamajo had a relatively light role here, acting more as a mediator and comedy coaches at times. Not necessarily a bad thing, as it let the comedians figure things out for themselves, and that little bit of Momoko relating with Sugiyama was good enough, even though again, I think she had much better friends than him. And overall, this was a good spotlight episode for characters who I still don't care for, but I can at least tolerate one of them now. If anything, at least they're better than some guest stars I could think of.
This isn't funny!
Thank you for watching, and do be sure to check out some of our other videos on this channel, which this season we're gonna have a lot of them. Yeah, we're gonna be covering 2.5 additional shows for this season, which does unfortunately mean that the Max Heart review will be a little bit on the back burner, but we'll still work on it when we can. So look forward to it, and until then though, for now my friends, and
Wonderful! Bravo! I loved that! Oh, it was great!
Well, it was pretty good. That wasn't meant to be a joke.
There were parts of it that weren't very good though.
It could have been a lot better.
I didn't really like it.
It was pretty terrible.
It was bad.
It was awful.